The wine glass shattered against the dining room floor as my mother-in-law's words echoed through the silence. Well, at least we know why there are no grandchildren yet. The entire family stared at me, their faces a mixture of pity and judgment. But what happened next would change everything they thought they knew about me, about my marriage, and about the secret I'd been carrying for 3 years. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I should have known the dinner was a trap the moment I walked into Margaret and Robert Thornton's pristine colonial home in Westfield. The dining room table, usually reserved for holidays, was set with their finest china, the kind that cost more than my monthly salary as a graphic designer. My husband Jake's entire family was there. His parents, his sister Caroline with her twin boys, and his brother David with his pregnant wife Emma, who kept rubbing her belly like she was polishing a trophy. "Sophia, dear, you look thin," Margaret announced before I'd even removed my coat. "Are you eating enough? You need to keep your strength up for—" She paused dramatically, glancing at my flat stomach. "For when the time comes?" I forced a smile and handed Jake my jacket. We'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and this conversation happened at every family gathering. The subtle hints about grandchildren had evolved into not-so-subtle interrogations about our reproductive timeline. Jake squeezed my hand as we took our seats. "Mom, we've talked about this," he said quietly, but Margaret was already pouring wine for everyone except me. "Oh, I didn't know if you were—" She trailed off meaningfully, leaving the implication hanging in the air like expensive perfume. "I'm not pregnant," I said flatly, accepting the glass she reluctantly filled. The appetizers were served in uncomfortable silence until Caroline decided to break it. "You know, Soph, if you're having trouble, there are specialists now. My friend Jennifer tried for years before she found the right doctor." "We're not having trouble," Jake interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma, barely showing at 4 months, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Have you tried tracking your ovulation? There are apps for everything now. I got pregnant with this little one on the first try using Fertility Track." I gripped my fork tighter. "That's wonderful for you." Robert, who'd been silent up until now, cleared his throat. "In my day, couples didn't wait around. We understood our responsibilities to the family line." "Times were different then, Dad," David said, though he shot me a look that suggested he agreed. Margaret nodded vigorously. "Exactly. I had Caroline at 22 and David at 24. By the time I was Sophia's age, I had 2 children and was considering a third." "I'm 28, Margaret, not ancient," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Of course not, dear, but your biological clock is ticking. Every month that passes makes it harder," Caroline finished. "The older you get, the more complications arise. Birth defects, miscarriages, fertility issues." The main course arrived, Margaret's famous pot roast that I'd once enjoyed but now tasted like sawdust in my mouth. The conversation mercifully shifted to David's promotion at the law firm, but I could feel their eyes on me throughout dinner, measuring, evaluating, finding me lacking. It was during dessert that Margaret deployed her final weapon. "I was cleaning out the attic last week and found Jake's baby clothes," she announced, producing a small blue outfit from seemingly nowhere. "Look how tiny this little sailor suit is. Jake was such a beautiful baby. He deserves to have children of his own." The implication was clear. I was denying Jake his right to fatherhood. "Mom," Jake warned, but she continued. "I've been doing some research, and there's a fertility clinic in Hartford with excellent success rates. Dr. Patricia Reeves, she's helped several women in our book club." "We don't need a fertility clinic," I said through gritted teeth. "Well, something's clearly not working," Robert stated bluntly. "You've been married 3 years. Most couples have at least 1 child by now." Emma nodded sympathetically. "Maybe it's stress? I read that stress can really impact fertility. Are you stressed? About work? Or maybe it's weight, Caroline suggested. You are quite thin. Sometimes women need a certain amount of body fat to ovulate properly. I felt Jake's hand on my knee, a warning to stay calm, but the room was spinning. These people who barely knew me, who saw me 6 times a year at obligatory family gatherings, were dissecting my body and my life like amateur physicians. Have you considered adoption? David asked. There are so many children who need homes. Though it's not the same as having your own, Margaret added quickly. Blood is blood. The final straw came when Caroline pulled out her phone. Actually, let me text Jennifer right now. She's been through all of this. Maybe she can recommend someone who specializes in... She looked at me apologetically, whatever the issue might be. The issue, I said, standing abruptly, is that we haven't been trying. The table went silent. 7 pairs of eyes stared at me in confusion. What do you mean? Margaret asked slowly. I mean, we haven't been trying to get pregnant. We've been actively preventing it. Jake's face had gone pale. Sophia. No, Jake. I'm done with this. I turned to face his family. You want to know why there are no grandchildren? It's because I've been on birth control for the past 3 years. Every single day I take a little white pill that prevents me from giving you what you think you're entitled to. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But you said you wanted children. When you got engaged, you said... I said I wanted children someday. Someday isn't now. But Jake wants to be a father, Caroline protested. Jake can speak for himself. All eyes turned to my husband, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. We've discussed it. We're not ready yet. Not ready? Robert's voice boomed. You're 30 years old, son. You have a good job, a house, a stable marriage. What more do you need to be ready? Time, Jake said quietly. We want more time together. Just us. Time for what? Emma asked, genuinely confused. What could be more important than starting a family? The question hung in the air, and I realized that to them, there really was nothing more important. Their entire worldview revolved around the nuclear family, the continuation of bloodlines, the assumption that marriage automatically meant procreation. Travel, I said finally. Career advancement, personal growth, figuring out who we are as individuals before we become responsible for another human being. Margaret shook her head sadly. Those are just excuses, dear. Selfish excuses. The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. I'd been called many things in my life, but never selfish. I volunteered at the animal shelter. I helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. I'd spent my entire career creating beautiful designs for nonprofit organizations at below-market rates. Selfish, I repeated. Yes, Margaret said firmly. Marriage is about building a family. It's about legacy, about giving your husband what he needs to feel fulfilled as a man. What Jake needs, Caroline added, is children. All men do. I looked at Jake, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his family that he was happy with our decision. Instead, he stared at his dessert plate. Jake? I prompted. He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. Doubt, regret, the beginning of resentment. Maybe they have a point, he said so quietly I almost didn't hear him. The betrayal was swift and brutal. After 3 years of conversations about waiting, about building our careers, about traveling together, about being ready when the time came, he was wavering. In front of his family, he was abandoning our united front. We should at least talk about it, he continued. Maybe start trying sooner than we planned. How much sooner? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, he glanced at his mother. Maybe we could stop the birth control and just see what happens. Margaret clapped her hands together. Oh, that's wonderful. Natural family planning. Leave it up to God. The room erupted in excited chatter. Caroline immediately started talking about baby showers and nursery themes. Emma began giving advice about prenatal vitamins. David discussed the tax benefits of dependence. Robert raised his wine glass in a toast to future grandchildren, and I stood there, invisible in my own life, watching my husband's family plan my reproductive future without consulting me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. Margaret frowned at the interruption. Who could that be at this hour? She glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the corner. It's nearly 8:30. Robert was already pushing back from the table. I'll get it. Probably some solicitor who doesn't know when to quit. The conversation about my future fertility continued in his absence, with Caroline now pulling up Pinterest boards of nursery designs on her phone. You'll want to start thinking about themes early, she advised, scrolling through pastel color schemes. Gender neutral is so popular now, though personally, I think it's nicer to know what you're having. I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment to collect myself. The small space felt like a sanctuary, decorated in Margaret's signature. Style of floral wallpaper and gold-framed family photos. Pictures of Jake as a baby smiled down at me from every surface. First steps, birthday parties, school photos. The message was clear. This is what you're denying him. My hands shook as I splashed cold water on my face. How had everything spiraled so quickly? An hour ago, I walked into this house as Jake's wife. Now I felt like a defective appliance being discussed for replacement. When I returned to the dining room, I found Robert standing in the doorway with a woman I'd never seen before. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled into a professional bun, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive. This is Dr. Helen Morrison, Robert announced, his voice carrying an odd tension. She says she needs to speak with Sophia. The table fell silent. Margaret's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Caroline's phone slipped from her hand. I'm sorry, I said slowly, but I think there's been some mistake. I don't know you. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Garrett, I'm a reproductive endocrinologist at Hartford Women's Medical Center. I believe we need to have a conversation. Jake stood abruptly. What's this about? Perhaps we could speak privately, Dr. Morrison suggested, but Margaret was already on her feet. Absolutely not. This is family business, and we're all family here. Her tone brooked no argument, and I recognized the voice she used when chairing. Hospital fundraisers, the voice that got things done. Dr. Morrison glanced around the room, clearly uncomfortable with the audience, but nodded. Very well. Mrs. Garrett, 3 weeks ago, you underwent comprehensive fertility testing at my clinic. The blood drained from my face. That's impossible. I've never been to your clinic. According to our records, you were referred by your gynecologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, following concerns about irregular cycles and difficulty conceiving. Jake's eyes snapped to mine. Sophia, what is she talking about? I have no idea. The words came out sharper than I intended. I've never had irregular cycles, and we haven't been trying to conceive. Dr. Morrison opened her briefcase and withdrew, a manila folder. I have the completed test results here. Blood work, hormone panels, ultrasounds, genetic screening. Everything was ordered under your name and insurance information. Margaret leaned forward hungrily. What do the results say? I'm afraid I can only discuss medical information with the patient herself. But if someone's been impersonating me, I started. The woman who came to my office knew your full medical history, your social security number, your insurance details. She answered security questions about your childhood surgeries and family medical history. My mind raced. Who would know those details? Who could have accessed my medical records? Emma gasped suddenly. Wait, I remember now. 3 weeks ago you asked me for Sophia's insurance information, Margaret. You said it was for the family emergency contact list. All eyes turned to Margaret, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed but not apologetic. I was worried about her, she said defensively. She's been married to my son for 3 years, with no pregnancies. I thought maybe there was an underlying issue that needed to be addressed. You impersonated me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You went to a doctor pretending to be me? I went to get answers that you clearly weren't going to get yourself. Jake sank back into his chair. Mom, what did you do? I did what needed to be done, Margaret replied firmly. Dr. Morrison, please share the results. If there's a medical issue preventing my daughter-in-law from conceiving, we need to know. Dr. Morrison looked deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Thornton, what you've done constitutes medical fraud and identity theft. I could have your daughter-in-law arrested. Now see here, Robert interjected. My wife was acting out of concern for family welfare. Your wife committed a felony, Dr. Morrison replied coolly. However, given the circumstances, I'm here to clarify the situation rather than press charges. Caroline leaned forward. But what do the tests say? Is there something wrong with Sophia? Dr. Morrison's eyes met mine. Mrs. Garrett, the woman who impersonated you requested a full fertility workup. The results show perfect reproductive health, optimal hormone levels, healthy ovarian reserve, no blockages or abnormalities. According to these tests, you should have no difficulty conceiving whenever you choose to try. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking. So she's fine? David asked. She can have children? More than fine. The woman who came to my office has the reproductive health of someone 10 years younger. Her fertility markers are in the 95th percentile. Margaret's face lit up. Oh, that's wonderful news. So there's no medical reason for the delay. Which brings me to why I'm really here, Dr. Morrison continued. During the appointment, the woman impersonating Mrs. Garrett made some concerning statements. She claimed to have been trying to conceive for over 2 years with no success. She requested immediate fertility treatments, including hormone injections and intrauterine insemination. Jake's head snapped up. What? She scheduled a series of appointments for next week, ovulation induction therapy, timed intercourse protocols, and preliminary IVF consultations. The total treatment plan would cost approximately $37,000. Robert's face turned purple. $37,000? The woman provided a credit card for the initial payment. When my office ran the card this afternoon for the scheduling deposit, it was declined. We attempted to contact the patient, but the phone number went to voicemail. That's when we discovered the real Mrs. Garrett's address and decided to make a house call. Margaret's triumphant expression crumbled. Well, I didn't authorize any treatments. I just wanted to know if there were problems. But you did authorize treatments. Dr. Morrison pulled out a stack of forms. You signed consent forms for hormone therapy, invasive procedures, and fertility drugs. You provided fake medical history, claiming 2 years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive. I grabbed the papers from her hands. There, in handwriting that looked remarkably like mine, was my signature on dozens of consent forms. Forms authorizing strangers to inject me with powerful hormones, to perform procedures on my body, to alter my reproductive system. How did you forge my signature? I demanded. Margaret looked genuinely confused. I didn't forge anything. I signed my own name. Dr. Morrison flipped to the signature page and held it up. There, clear as day, was Margaret's own distinctive handwriting spelling out Sophia Marie Garrett. The absurdity of it might have been funny under different circumstances. Margaret had committed identity theft so incompetently that she'd signed her own name to my medical forms. Mrs. Thornton, Dr. Morrison said patiently, you can't sign someone else's name to medical documents, even if you write it in your own handwriting. But I was acting on her behalf. You were acting without her knowledge or consent. That's medical fraud. Emma suddenly spoke up. Wait, I don't understand something. If the tests show Sophia can get pregnant easily, and they haven't been trying for 2 years like Margaret claimed, then why haven't they gotten pregnant? Dr. Morrison looked at me expectantly. The moment of truth had arrived. I could continue. The charade. Let them all believe we'd been trying unsuccessfully, or I could tell them exactly why there had been no pregnancies. I took a deep breath. Because I've been on birth control for the past 3 years. The silence was deafening. But, at dinner you said, Caroline started. I said we haven't been trying. I never said we'd been trying and failing. Margaret's eyes narrowed. So you've been deliberately preventing pregnancy? Yes. While letting us worry that there might be medical issues? I never asked you to worry. About my reproductive system. And you let me spend an entire afternoon at a medical clinic undergoing tests and consultations. You chose to impersonate me. I had no idea you were doing any of this. Robert stood up slowly. Let me get this straight. You've been actively preventing pregnancy while allowing your mother-in-law to believe you might have fertility issues. I've been taking birth control, while my mother-in-law made assumptions about my private medical decisions. Jake finally found his voice. Sophia? Why didn't you just tell them we weren't ready? I did tell them. Every time this subject comes up, I say we're waiting. But none of you listen. Margaret's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. So, while I was sitting in that doctor's office answering personal questions about cycles and ovulation, you were at home taking pills to prevent exactly what I was trying to help you achieve? What you were trying to help me achieve without my knowledge or permission. Dr. Morrison cleared her throat. I think I should leave you all to discuss this privately. Mrs. Thornton, I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow to sign paperwork acknowledging the fraud and canceling all scheduled appointments. As she packed her briefcase, she looked directly at me. Mrs. Garrett, for what it's worth, your reproductive health is excellent. Whenever you're ready to start a family, you shouldn't have any difficulties. The front door closed behind her, leaving us all staring at each other across the wreckage of the evening. The silence stretched until Margaret finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled fury. $37,000, Sophia. Do you have any idea what that means? It means you committed fraud, I replied evenly. It means I tried to help fix what I thought was broken. She slammed her palm on the table, making the china rattle. While you were sitting on information that could have prevented this entire mess, Caroline's voice was barely above a whisper. I can't believe this. All those conversations about specialists and treatments, and you knew the whole time that you could get pregnant whenever you wanted. I never claimed I couldn't get pregnant. You all assumed. We assumed, David interrupted. Because normal married couples don't actively prevent pregnancy for 3 years without a reason. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, one hand protective over her belly. What kind of reason could there be? I mean, you're married. You love each other. Why wouldn't you want Jake's children? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Jake's family, who had never once asked me what I wanted, only when I would give them what they expected. Maybe because I'm not ready to have my body hijacked by someone else's timeline, I said quietly. Robert's eyebrows shot up. Hijacked? That's a hell of a way to talk about motherhood. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like everyone in this room thinks they have more say over my reproductive choices than I do. Jake finally looked up from his untouched dessert. That's not fair, Soph. They're just excited about the possibility of grandchildren. Excited enough to commit identity theft, apparently. Margaret's face crumpled. I was trying to help. When Jennifer's daughter couldn't conceive, she wasted 2 years before seeing a specialist. 2 years of heartbreak that could have been avoided with early intervention. But I'm not Jennifer's daughter, and I wasn't trying to conceive. How were we supposed to know that? Caroline demanded. You never said you were actively preventing it. Because it's none of your business. The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. The room recoiled as if I'd struck them physically. None of our business? Margaret's voice was dangerously quiet. My son's happiness is my business. His future is my business. Our family legacy is my business. Your family legacy, I repeated slowly. Not my body, not my choice, not my timeline. Your legacy. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything. You just admitted that you see me as a vessel for your family's continuation, not as a person, with my own desires and decisions. Emma leaned forward earnestly. But Sophia, don't you want to be a mother? Don't you want to give Jake children? The question everyone had been dancing around finally lay bare on the table. I could feel Jake's eyes burning into me, waiting for an answer that would either vindicate or condemn him in front of his family. Someday, I said carefully, maybe someday I want children. But I want them when I'm ready, not when a committee decides I should be. When will you be ready? Jake's voice was barely audible. I turned to face my husband directly. I don't know. Jake, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5, maybe never. That's what being ready means. It's not something you can schedule or force. Margaret gasped. Never? You might never want children? It's a possibility I have to consider honestly, yes. But you told Jake you wanted kids when you got engaged, Caroline protested. I told Jake I might want kids someday. He heard what he wanted to hear. Jake's face went white. That's not how I remember it. Then maybe we remember different conversations. Robert stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This is unbelievable. Jake, did you know she felt this way? I thought... Jake started, then stopped. I thought she was just nervous about timing. I thought once we were more settled, she'd naturally want to start a family. I never said that. But you never said you might not want children at all. Because I don't know. The frustration boiled over. I don't know if I want children because no one has ever let me figure it out for myself. From the moment we got engaged, I've been fielded questions about pregnancy and babies and nurseries. I've been treated like a walking incubator instead of a human being with complex feelings about an enormous life decision. David shook his head slowly. So you've been stringing Jake along for 3 years? I've been married to Jake for 3 years. We've built a life together, bought a house together, supported each other through career changes and family deaths, and all the normal challenges of marriage. How is that stringing him along? Because marriage is about building a family, Margaret said firmly. Without children, you're just playing house. Millions of couples would disagree with you. Well, Jake's not one of them, Caroline said pointedly. Are you, Jake? All eyes turned to my husband again. He looked trapped, torn between loyalty to me and the family expectations he'd grown up with. I do want children, he said quietly. I've always wanted to be a father. I know you do, I replied. I've never questioned that. But you've been preventing it without discussing it with me. We have discussed it, multiple times. We agreed to wait until we were both ready. I thought we were talking about waiting a year or two, not indefinitely. And I thought we were talking about making the decision together when the time felt right, not having it imposed on us by external pressure. Emma looked back and forth between us. This sounds like something you two should have worked out before. You got married. We tried, Jake said. But every conversation got derailed by... He gestured around the table. This. Family pressure, biological clocks, everyone else's opinions about what we should be doing. Margaret bristled. We've never pressured anyone. We've simply expressed our natural desire for grandchildren. Mom, you literally impersonated my wife to get her fertility tested. That was different. I thought there might be a medical issue. No, I said firmly. You thought I was defective because I wasn't producing grandchildren on your schedule. So you took it upon yourself to have me examined like livestock. That is not what happened. Then what would you call secretly testing my reproductive capacity without my knowledge or consent? The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic, normal people living normal lives where medical fraud wasn't a dinner-time topic. Caroline finally spoke. Okay, maybe Mom went too far. But Sophia, you have to understand how this looks from our perspective. You've been married for 3 years. You're 28 years old. Jake wants children. What are we supposed to think? You're supposed to think that I'm an adult capable of making my own reproductive decisions. But what about Jake's feelings? What about mine? You chose to marry him, Robert said bluntly. You made a commitment. I committed to being his wife, not his broodmare. Margaret flinched at the word. No one is calling you that. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, the only thing you've ever valued about me is my potential to produce Jake's offspring. You don't ask about my work, my interests, my dreams, my goals. You ask about my ovulation cycle. That's not true, Caroline protested weakly. When was the last time any of you asked me about my graphic design business? Silence. When was the last time you asked about my volunteer work at the animal shelter? More silence. What about my photography hobby? Or the novel I've been writing? Or my plans to go back to school for my master's degree? Jake's head snapped up. What master's degree? The one I've been researching for 6 months. The one I plan to discuss with you once I decided on a program. You never mentioned that. Because every conversation about the future gets hijacked by questions about when we're having babies. Emma looked genuinely curious. What would you study? Art therapy. I want to work with trauma survivors, help them process their experiences through creative expression. That's actually really cool, David said, sounding surprised. It's also a 2-year commitment that would be nearly impossible with young children. Margaret's expression hardened. So you'd rather pursue a degree than give your husband a family? I'd rather pursue my own goals and dreams before taking on the responsibility of shaping another human being's entire existence. But Jake's dreams matter too, Caroline said. Of course they do. But his dreams don't automatically override mine just because he's ready first. Robert turned from the window. So what's the solution here? Jake wants children now. You want a master's degree. Someone has to compromise. Or, I said quietly, maybe we need to have an honest conversation about whether we actually want the same things in life. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief. Jake's face went ashen. Are you talking about divorce? I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Someone who had been willing to throw me under the bus in front of his family. Someone who had never asked about my master's degree plans because he was too focused on his own timeline for fatherhood. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe I am. The word divorce seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Margaret's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate in a spray of red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood across the white china. Divorce? Margaret's voice cracked. Over children? Over fundamental incompatibility, I corrected. Over the fact that Jake and I apparently want completely different lives. Jake pushed back from the table so violently his chair toppled backward. This is insane. We don't want different lives, Sophia. We just have different timelines. Do we? Because I want a career that fulfills me, travel, personal growth, maybe graduate school. You want babies and suburban motherhood and me being available for family dinners where your mother commits felonies. That's not fair, isn't it? Name one conversation we've had in the past year about my goals that didn't end with, but what? About children? Jake opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Caroline finally broke it. Maybe you both just need some time to cool down. This has been an emotional evening. This isn't about cooling down, I said. This is about 3 years of fundamental miscommunication. Emma leaned forward, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. But you love each other, right? Love conquers everything. Does it? Does love conquer Jake lying to me about being okay with waiting? Does love conquer his family committing identity theft? Does love conquer the fact that apparently I'm only valued here for my reproductive potential? David rubbed his forehead. Nobody said you're only valued for that. Really? Then why has every single conversation I've had with this family for 3 years centered around my fertility? Why did Margaret think it was appropriate to have my ovaries examined without my permission? Why is Jake's desire for children automatically more important than my desire for education? Robert stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Now hold on. Jake's desires aren't automatically more important, but marriage is about compromise. If he wants children and you don't— I never said I don't want children. I said I don't know if I want them, and I'm not ready to decide under pressure. But there are biological realities, Margaret said desperately. Your fertility will decline. If you wait too long, then maybe I wait too long. Maybe that's a risk I'm willing to take to make sure I'm making the right decision for the right reasons. Jake finally found his voice again. What if I'm not willing to take that risk? The question hung between us like a sword. I looked at my husband, this man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years, and realized we were strangers. Then maybe we need to discuss that honestly instead of pretending we're on the same page. We were on the same page. You said you wanted children someday, and you heard someday soon when I meant someday maybe. Caroline shook her head. This is why people need to have these conversations before they get married. We tried, Jake said bitterly, but every time we talked about it, your mother would interrupt with questions about grandchildren, or Emma would share pregnancy advice, or someone would make a comment about biological clocks. We never got to have a private conversation about what we actually wanted. Margaret looked stricken. Are you blaming us for your marriage problems? I'm saying this family makes it impossible to have personal conversations about personal decisions. We're just interested in your lives. You're invasive, I said bluntly. There's a difference between interest and invasion. Emma shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we are a little involved, but it comes from love. Love doesn't justify identity theft. I said I was sorry about that, Margaret protested. Actually, you didn't. You said you were trying to help. You've never apologized. The distinction seemed to surprise her. Well, I am sorry. I shouldn't have impersonated you. And what? And you shouldn't have discussed my reproductive health with a doctor without my consent. And you shouldn't have authorized medical procedures for my body. And you shouldn't have spent thousands of dollars on fertility treatments for someone else's marriage. Margaret's face flushed. I get it. I made mistakes. Did you? Or would you do it again if you thought it was necessary? The question caught her off guard. She glanced around the table, looking for support, but found only uncomfortable faces. I don't know, she admitted finally. That's the problem, I said. You don't see boundaries, you see obstacles to getting what you want. Jake sat back down heavily. Okay, maybe my family is too involved, but that doesn't mean we can't work through this. Can we? Because right now it feels like you and I want completely different things from life. We want the same thing, he insisted. We want to be happy together. Do we define happiness the same way? He hesitated. I think so. I define happiness as having the freedom to pursue my own goals and make my own choices about my body and my future. How do you define it? I define it as building a life together. A real life, with a family. And if I told you that my real life doesn't include children? If I decided that art therapy and travel and volunteer work fulfill me more than motherhood would? His face went pale. I'd say you're not the woman I married. The words hit me like a physical blow. The woman you married never promised you children on your timeline. She promised to build a life with me. She did build a life with you. A beautiful life. But apparently it's not enough. Caroline tried to intervene. Maybe you're both being too extreme. There has to be middle ground. What middle ground? I asked. I either have children or I don't. There's no compromise position on pregnancy. But there's compromise on timing, David suggested. Maybe you could agree on a timeline that works for both of you. Like what? I finish my master's degree and then immediately get pregnant? I have children I'm not sure I want because Jake's decided he's ready? Would that be so terrible? Emma asked genuinely. I wasn't sure I was ready either, but once I got pregnant, the maternal instincts kicked in. And if they don't? If I have children I resent because I felt pressured into it? What happens to those children? What happens to my marriage? The room fell silent as the weight of that possibility settled over them. Robert cleared his throat. Perhaps you should consider counseling. Professional help. We tried counseling last year, Jake said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. This was news to the family. You did? Margaret asked. 3 sessions, I confirmed. The therapist said we had fundamental differences in our life goals that couldn't be resolved through communication alone. What did that mean? Caroline asked. It meant, Jake said slowly, that we weren't as compatible as we thought we were. But you stayed together, Emma pointed out. Because we loved each other, I said. And because we thought love would be enough. And now? Robert asked. I looked around the table at these people who had never seen me as anything more than Jake's wife, who had reduced me to my reproductive capacity, who had violated my privacy and autonomy in service of their own desires. Now I think, love might not be enough after all. Jake's shoulders slumped. So what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we've been trying to force something that doesn't fit. Maybe we've been so focused on making our relationship work that we ignored the fact that we want different lives. But we could make it work, he pleaded, if we just tried harder. Jake, I don't want to try harder to convince you that I'm enough without children, and I don't want you to try harder to be okay with a wife who might never give them to you. Margaret suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. You're talking about throwing away a marriage over hypothetical problems. These aren't hypothetical problems. They're real differences in what we want from life. So you're just going to give up? Walk away from everything you've built together? I looked at Jake, really looked at him, and saw the pain in his eyes, the confusion, the desperate hope that we could somehow magic our way back to compatibility. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe we need some time apart to figure out what we actually want. Without family pressure, without expectations, without trying to make each other into people we're not. A separation? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe. At least until we can have honest conversations about our future without an audience. Margaret looked around the table desperately. Someone say something. Don't let them do this. But no one spoke. Because deep down, I think they all knew what I'd finally admitted to myself. That sometimes love isn't enough when two people want fundamentally different lives. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let each other go before the resentment builds into something that destroys whatever love remains. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, each note echoing through the devastated dining room like a funeral bell. Margaret's shattered wine glass lay forgotten on the table, red stains spreading across the white tablecloth like a crime scene. Jake stood up slowly, his movements mechanical. I need some air. He walked out through the French doors onto the back patio, leaving me alone with his family. The silence was suffocating until Caroline finally spoke. Are you really going to leave him? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I'm going to stop pretending we want the same things just to keep everyone else comfortable. Emma dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. But you seemed so happy, At the wedding, at family gatherings, I was happy. In a lot of ways, I still am. But happiness built on avoiding difficult conversations isn't sustainable. Robert loosened his tie, looking older than he had an hour ago. In my generation, people worked through their differences. Divorce wasn't the first option. Maybe not. But how many of those marriages were actually fulfilling for both people? How many women stayed silent about what they wanted because speaking up meant being selfish? Margaret's voice was small when she finally spoke. I never meant to drive you away. You didn't drive me away, Margaret, but you never let me find my own way either. I thought I was helping. When I was your age, all I wanted was children. It never occurred to me that someone might want something different. And that's okay. But when someone tells you they want something different, you have to listen instead of trying to fix them. David gathered up the broken glass pieces carefully. What happens now? Do you move out? I think Jake and I need to have some very honest conversations. Alone. Without well-meaning family members offering solutions. Caroline looked stricken. Did we really make it impossible for you to talk to each other? I considered sugarcoating the answer, but the evening had gone too far for politeness. Yes. Every time Jake and I tried to discuss our future, someone would interrupt with advice or expectations or assumptions about what we should want. We never got to figure out what we actually wanted. Emma shifted uncomfortably. I feel terrible. All those times I gave pregnancy advice, you were trying to be helpful, but you were solving a problem that didn't exist. We weren't struggling to conceive. We were struggling to communicate. Through the French doors, I could see Jake pacing the patio, his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his best friend Tyler, the one person who might give him honest advice instead of what he wanted to hear. Margaret began clearing plates with shaking hands. $37,000, she muttered. I spent $37,000 on fertility treatments for someone who didn't want them. The credit card was declined, remember? You didn't actually spend anything except dignity. She looked up sharply. Are you mocking me? No. I'm pointing out that this could have been much worse. Dr. Morrison could have pressed charges. The clinic could have sued. Your insurance company could have investigated fraud. Robert blanched. We could still face legal consequences. Probably not if you cooperate with canceling everything and acknowledge what happened. But Margaret, you need to understand how serious this was. You didn't just violate my privacy. You committed multiple felonies. I know, she whispered. I know that now. Caroline stood up abruptly. I should check on the boys. They're probably wondering where Mommy went. She paused at the doorway. Sophia, for what it's worth, I hope you and Jake can work this out. Even if working it out means no grandchildren from us? She hesitated. I hope you can both be happy, whatever that looks like. It was the first time anyone in Jake's family had said anything like that to me. After she left, Emma struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her lower back. I should get home too. David, can you drive? I'm exhausted. David nodded, gathering their coats. As they prepared to leave, Emma turned back to me. Can I ask you something personal? More personal than discussing my fertility over dinner? She had the grace to look embarrassed. Do you think you'll ever want children? Really? I thought about it seriously. I honestly don't know. Maybe in 5 years I'll be desperate for a baby. Maybe in 10 years I'll be fulfilled by my career and my marriage and have no interest in pregnancy. The problem isn't that I don't know. The problem is that everyone expects me to know right now. But what if you wait too long? Then I wait. Too long. That's my choice to make and my consequence to live with. She nodded slowly. I never thought about it that way. After David and Emma left, the house felt cavernous. Margaret continued cleaning with obsessive precision, while Robert disappeared into his study, probably researching the legal implications of medical fraud. I sat alone at the devastated dinner table, staring at the ruins of the evening. Jake finally came back inside, his face drawn and tired. "I called Tyler," he said without preamble. "What did he say?" "That I've been an idiot, that I married you for who you are, not for who I thought you'd become." He sat down across from me. He also said his wife went through something similar with his family, and they almost divorced before he learned to set boundaries. Smart friend? Yeah. Jake looked around at his mother frantically cleaning. "Mom, can you give us some privacy?" Margaret clutched her dish towel. "This is my house. Mom." "Fine. But don't make any permanent decisions tonight. You're both emotional." After she left, Jake and I stared at each other across the table. The silence felt different now, not hostile, but uncertain. "I love you," he said finally. "I love you too, but I'm not sure that's enough anymore. Tyler thinks we can fix this. He thinks if we go to counseling again, with a different therapist, maybe someone who specializes in this kind of thing." "Jake, the last therapist told us we have fundamental incompatibilities. A different therapist isn't going to change what we want from life, but maybe we can find compromises we haven't thought of." I looked at my husband, this good man who deserved to be a father, who deserved a wife who wanted the same things he did. What if there are no compromises? What if I get my master's degree and still don't want children? What if I decide I'm fulfilled by other things? His face crumpled. "Then I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Or we could acknowledge now that we might be headed toward that bridge and decide whether we want to walk toward it together or separately." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose you either. But I also don't want to spend the next 5 years feeling guilty for not being ready while you feel frustrated waiting for something that might never happen. So what do we do?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "I think we need some time apart. Real time, not just a few days. Time for me to explore what I actually want without feeling pressured, and time for you to decide if you can be happy with uncertainty." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe I take that apartment above Sarah's photography studio for a few months. Maybe we go to individual therapy instead of couples counseling. Maybe we date each other again instead of trying to save a marriage that might be built on wrong assumptions." Jake's eyes filled with tears. "What if time apart shows us we don't belong together? Then at least we'll know for sure instead of spending years resenting each other." He squeezed my hand. "And what if it shows us we do belong together? Then we'll have a much stronger foundation to build on." Margaret appeared in the doorway, unable to resist eavesdropping. "You're really going to separate?" "We're going to take some time to figure out what we actually want," I corrected. "Without family input." She nodded reluctantly. "I suppose I haven't made things easier." "No, you haven't. But Margaret, this isn't entirely your fault. Jake and I should have had these conversations 3 years ago. We should have been clearer about our expectations and our uncertainties. And I should have minded my own business," she admitted. Robert emerged from his study, looking grim. "I've spoken with our attorney. The medical fraud situation is manageable if we cooperate fully and make restitution for any costs incurred. But Sophia, you could pursue criminal charges if you wanted." "I don't want to destroy your family. I just want to be left alone to make my own choices." He nodded. "Fair enough." Jake stood up slowly. "I'll start packing some things tonight. Give you space to think." "Where will you go?" Tyler offered his guest room. He paused. "How long do you think you'll need?" "I don't know. Long enough to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else expects." As Jake headed upstairs to pack, I remained at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of the evening that had changed everything. Margaret sat down beside me, looking exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Really, truly sorry. Not just for the medical thing, but for all of it. For making you feel like you weren't enough as you are. Thank you. That means a lot. Do. You think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered the question honestly. I think I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. She nodded. I understand. An hour later, I stood in the driveway watching Jake load his suitcase into his car. The night air was crisp, full of the promise of autumn and change. I'll call you in a few days, he said. Maybe we can get coffee. Talk without an audience. I'd like that. He hesitated, then pulled me into a hug. I do love you, Sophia. Exactly as you are. I know. And maybe that will be enough. But we need to find out for sure. As his taillights disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of an uncertain future. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't know what came next. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a gift rather than a problem. The road ahead was unclear, but it was finally completely my own to choose. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.